Since some of you guys have been extra bad as of late, I've decided to go ahead and give you a twofer for this weekend. Now let's get this on the table right away. You've got a list of things going down in the news, but the main thing that we need to talk about is this whole DACA thing, because I don't want any of you guys and girls out there going wobbly on this. So we're going to make sure that we hold people's feet to the fire, starting with Senator Kamala Empty Suit Harris. This woman, who apparently thinks she's going to be the heir apparent to Barack Obama, and she's trying the exact same pathetic stuff that he did, though she's not quite as clever as Barack Obama. Obama, you'll recall, got his full 15 minutes of fame and was able to get himself onto the national stage talking about Hurricane Katrina. Now you got Kamala Harris, who's got 3 or 4 hurricanes back in the U.S., and fooled as she is, she's not even smart enough to capitalize on that and do something safe and smart. Instead, she's decided that she's going to do something that is less useful than having done nothing. She's assured that she's going to be the spokeswoman for DACA. What does that tell you? She's signaling with this, she's making it clear to the white Democratic hierarchy, you need to support me because I ain't saying a damn thing for black people, and yeah, I'm focusing on people other than black folks, and that way the racial pecking order remains in place. Because that's what this is all about. White supremacists got a short con and a long con. They got the short game and they got the long game. Short game is that they want to try to more or less stabilize the percentage of real white people in America and put the fear of God into some of these would-be non-white elements, regardless of whether they consider themselves to be white or not. But the long con happens to be to maintain the racialist pecking order that undergirds the amount of force, the preponderance of force that they're able to use to maintain white supremacy in the United States. Now, in case some of you hadn't heard, Kamala Harris is planning to run for president. I posted about this on my Twitter feed, and you can already see it now in the mealy-mouthed, non-committal gibberish that she's spewing online, will not commit over black people or concerns. She understands that if you want to be a Democratic contender for president, well, as Tariq Ali once put it, if you want to wear Caesar's robes, you must act as Caesar, and Caesar ain't about to change the racialist pecking order in the U.S. Kamala Empty Suit Harris is being certain she doesn't take up any position that might offend white society unless a sufficient number of white politicians have already stepped out in front and done it first. This isn't leading from the front, it's leading from the middle. It's the same playbook Barack Obama used, and Kamala Harris is running it line by line. She's bold standing up for immigrants, bold standing up for women, mostly white, but with black folks, crickets. And you better keep an eye on this woman, because the white media is trying to basically find anyone who they think could hopefully be an early frontrunner for 2020, and Kamala Harris thinks that she's going to throw her Burger King crown in the ring. She's already told herself that Donald Trump can be knocked over. You just need the right person to do it. Oh, I'll score an upset win. Let me tell you something. Donald Trump. I'm going to go ahead and say this now. Donald Trump will more than likely win re-election in 2020, and the reason is twofold. One, the Democrats are largely in disarray. That's what happens when you've got two political parties who are essentially two wings of the same white supremacist party. There's no real need for the Democrats to organize themselves. That's kind of like saying, why is it the Washington Generals never organized themselves against the Harlem Globetrotters? Because god dang it, they're employees of the same company. That's what's going on here. Donald Trump, I think, will more than likely win in 2020 because there's no real competition. And whatever competition comes along, they're up against the fact that Donald Trump is making it clear that he is the white candidate. You've already had the allegedly first non-white president. Well, now you got the first unabashedly in-your-face white president. And there's a lot of white folks who like that. Don't let these opinion polls and such fool you, okay? It's the same stuff that was going on last year. We heard them all say the opinion polls showed that Donald Trump would lose, and we all know how that turned out now, don't we? Just because people are not enthused about voting for somebody doesn't mean they won't vote for them. Just because they don't like somebody's antics doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to fall into the opposite camp. See, that's a political reality that Kamala Harris is flying in the face of. I guess she figures that she's going to get out there and play to the white media. Never mind the fact that the media is run by and large by a bunch of white males who have more in common with Trump than not. Kamala Harris has been engaging in ever more desperate publicity stunts to try to garner some quickie attention for herself. There's no strategy going on here. There is no big idea. There is no game plan. It's basically, I'm going to talk about Trump and Russia. I'm going to talk about DACA. And apparently this is going to get you support. How? You're trying to be everybody's buddy when what you need to be doing is showing that you're going to lead. But then again, Kamala Harris has never led. And there is some of the white media who are lauding her for this. I guess they know a perfect fool when they see one. Kamala Harris decided that Trump's Russia connection was going to be the horse that she would ride to glory. Well, of course, she's seen that horse didn't get very good grass mileage. See, Barack Obama was smart enough to use Hurricane Katrina to get some quickie headlines because he was smart enough to understand that it was a non-controversial stance to take. But at the same time, it would give him the ability to be able to obliquely attack George Bush while at the same time not offending too many of Bush's core supporters. Barack Obama understood the game. Political stalking horses like Obama and Harris, they always use the same stale MO. You find a high-profile issue that's in the news, that way the media's doing about half your work for you. An issue that's politically safe and won't cost you too many folks. And then you talk boldly against the opposition party using this non-issue, and you get to pretend that somehow you've done something. It's the perfect non-event event. And it's exactly what the political bootlick does, because you're not merely manipulating the public into thinking, hey, you stand for something, but you're also making the powers that be, the icy political forces in the shadows, you're letting them know that you're not about to rock the boat. Obama used Katrina as a media springboard to attack the GOP, same way Harris is trying and failing to use Russia, and neither of them is talking about punishment, by the way. Neither one of them said a word about punishment. Barack Obama never said people need to be held accountable in FEMA for the failure in New Orleans. No talk of punishment. Just like he didn't talk about punishment for the scumbags who raped the national economy and caused the worst economic disaster since the Great Depression. No talk of punishment, and there's not going to be. The people who Barack Obama was expected to get big campaign donations from, they were listening very closely. It's kind of like those clowns from the Daily Stormer when they were listening to Trump talk about the white supremacist who stormed Charlottesville. They correctly interpreted, hey, he's not actually saying anything about us. He talked around us. And when the white media tried to hold his feet to the fire, he walked away. They understood that Trump was deliberately talking around them and not actually pointing any comments at them. But they got it. They understood it. They saw the scam. And the same thing went for the big fat cats on Wall Street with Barack Obama. He didn't talk about punishment. They were like, okay, good. Do you ever wonder why it is that Barack Obama was able to get more money and more campaign donations than any candidate for president in American history? Think about that. George W. Bush, he did more to rape the national economy than any leader in the history of the world. And yet, he didn't get as much money as Barack Obama did. Ask yourself this question. What on earth could justify that for a guy who hadn't even made it to the White House yet? How could somebody on Wall Street, or one of these big corporate hedge funds, or one of these big political donors, one of these mega multinational businessmen, how on earth could they feel confident rolling the dice for Barack Obama, considering what George W. Bush had been doing for 8 years? What on earth could Barack Obama possibly have promised these men that was more valuable than what George W. Bush had already done? The tax cuts, tax breaks, no one going to jail, regulations all torn down. What the world did Barack Obama promise them that could have possibly been more valuable than what George Bush already did? And then you see the fact that there were no prosecutions, no investigations. It all came to a screeching halt. Barack Obama would not even discuss the issue of what's to be done about the men who destroyed the national economy. He wouldn't even discuss the subject, wouldn't even broach it, wouldn't even bring it up. The country was on the verge of a revolution 8 years ago, and by pretending to address America's cardinal and greatest sin, by putting up a political distraction, which is what Barack Obama was, they got to dodge the issue. That's what happened. And on top of that, they got all that juicy federal bailout money. See, that's what Obama promised them that was more valuable than what George Bush already did. He said, I'm going to keep you out of prison, and I'm going to make sure you get some federal loot to go along with it, but I need some campaign donations. Sold! And Kamala Harris, coming from California, you already know she's plugged in with Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the West Coast libs, the rest of the white supremacist liberal machine out there. So I'm sure that she's already got her group of donors, surely George Clooney and his ilk lined up. But what's not lined up is anything that's going to be of benefit to black people. See, that's not a plank of her political platform. Kamala Harris ain't worried about what's going to be happening to all the black people who have been railroaded into prison. In the last couple of weeks, some white media outlets have been talking about the fact that there have been more exonerations of black inmates wrongly convicted, wrongly imprisoned in the last year than there's practically ever been since numbers have been kept on record. And yet, former prosecutor Kamala Empty Suit Harris ain't got a word to say about that. In fact, she doesn't have a word to say about anything that might be of interest to black people, because far as she's concerned, she's going to get out there and say, oh, my great-grandmother was black, or man, I got some black folks in my family, and that should get to the black folks, hey, I'm one of you. And we'll see how many black people are dumb enough to fall for it. But it ain't going to be because some of us over here in the B1 Brigade haven't been putting the doggone spotlight on this heifer. The black vote is on strike. Either until the Democrats finally bend the knee and bow their heads before the real moral authority in America, the only legitimate moral authority in America, which is the black community, the African American community, the only real moral authority this country or the world, truth be told, has ever had in the modern era, or until we have gotten our act together economically and politically in that order to the point that we can start fielding our own candidates, because that's where this is going regardless. Even if the Democrats do pretend for a hot minute to actually discover religion and do what they should have been doing the last 150 years and supporting a moral people who are the only true compass to progress that this nation will ever have, if they decide that they're going to put up a sham and say, okay, we'll go ahead, throw you a few bones, we'll make a couple of token gestures, we'll put a little bit of meat on the bones this time, doesn't matter. It'll be cute for a stopgap, but the point is, we're still going in our own direction, which is that we're going to have people who we choose, rock solid people from our own ranks, and Barack Obama ain't one of them, and Kamala Harris ain't one of them. See, we have a short game and a long game too. But all of a sudden, Kamala Harris, who normally had been trying to see if she could get herself some quickie headlines with Trump, now that ain't working, you got this woman who's giving innuendos that Donald Trump is violating the Constitution. I guess that's going to be her big thing. I'm a lawyer and I know about the Constitution. Yeah, same way Barack Obama was a constitutional professor at Columbia University, and we all know how much good that did us. Kamala Harris can drop all the hints she wants about Trump committing high crimes. She doesn't say a peep about what ought to actually be done should the allegations prove true. So even if you take the black community out of the conversation, which Kamala Harris has certainly done, you can't get around the fact that Kamala Harris isn't actually talking about doing anything. Yeah, you gotta give her some credit. She learned the lesson of Obama's political success. A non-white candidate's biggest hurdle to the presidency will obviously be the white vote. If you can appeal to them, then the non-white vote, specifically the black vote, ought to fall into your lap by default, or at least that's how the theory goes. And I suppose in her mind there's some cachet for this presupposition. Everybody knows that Hillary was a crap candidate, but even Republicans had to admit that the main reason Donald Trump won was because the black vote didn't turn out for the Democrats like they had in 2008 or even 2012. And this was very interesting to me. I mean, you had all the right-wing pundits from Fox News to right-wing hate radio all saying the same thing. Yeah, Hillary Clinton lost. She got more of the popular vote, but the truth of the matter is, in those crucial states where she could have flipped them or at least maintained the Democratic majority for the Electoral College, the black vote wasn't there to support her. And because the black vote did not turn out, now of course being the white media, they gotta make sure they throw the red meat to the other white supremacists and say, well, black people vote along lines of race. Yeah, because white voters never do that. Give me a break. But they had to go ahead and sprinkle some BS on it for ease of digestion for their chosen audience of psychopathic racists. But the reality was, they did get the point across, which was we fully recognize that the reason Donald Trump is president is because the black vote stayed home. The Republicans get that. And the Democrats get that too, but the difference is the Republicans are not looking for black votes, and the Democrats are hoping they can find a way to galvanize enough Hispanics. Well, if Trump has his way, ain't going to be enough Hispanics for you to galvanize. Nobody's saying, you know what? We got to get this black vote riled up the right way here, because they understand that the winds of political change have blown, and that there's new voices the black community's listening to, like ours. They saw what happened with Black Lives Matters. Enough black folks who actually made clear you're not going to make it into all lives matter. You're not going to pivot to something else. We said black, and it's staying black. We have confronted them with a nightmare scenario. The Democrats are offended. They're offended that black people dug in our heels and said, no, you're not changing the subject. And it ain't about people of color. It's not about the inner city. It's not about non-whites. It's about black. In other words, we are directly demanding the Democrats threaten the very racialist social order that they themselves depend upon. The same Democrats who have been hoping that they can fool black people into sitting on our hands until they eventually starve us for resources to the point that we're exterminated. Now they're seeing that, nah, we ain't going gently into that good night. We're going to make some noise. We're going to demand that you stop the kill machine that you've had running against us. The Democrats are going, we need something else. Yeah, no wonder they want to talk about DACA. No wonder they want to talk about Russia. They want to talk about the man on the moon. But they don't want to talk about black folks because this is about maintaining white supremacy. And black empowerment is the antidote to white supremacy. You want to bring down white supremacy worldwide? You put some power in the hands of black folks, dollars with an agenda, an economy with an ideology. That's how you stop white supremacy. And there's no substitute for that. It won't come from the Asian community, and it won't come from the Hispanic community. Look at the racism and colorism in Latin America. See how the racialist hierarchy is there. They were classified as white until the 1970s when Richard Nixon revoked their white status, and they've been trying to reclaim that classification ever since. So obviously the only game in town for taking down white supremacy is black folks in the US. And that's where people like Kamala Harris come in. They don't have the ability to try to mislead us indirectly. There's not going to be any more JFKs coming along or RFKs giving lip service. So now it's like, oh, I guess we need somebody who looks more like them. So they find somebody, and Dr. John Henrik Clarke talked about this, sexual politics. You got somebody with a white father and a black mother, or a black mother and a white father, and you're sitting here wondering, why is this person so confused? They're not confused at all. They were sent in by your enemies to mislead you. And it is not harmless whenever people like Kamala Empty Suit Harris get in front of the cameras and decide they're going to talk about DACA, Russia, or anything other than black people. Because when that happens, the white media is going to promote her as being a black politician. And obviously black politicians don't give a damn about black folks, so it's okay for everybody else to ignore black people too, because after all, black people's own so-called leaders, as the white media promotes them, they don't think about black people. So what that means is you're not supposed to be saying anything either. Oh, don't worry, black people already have their own representatives. Why, look at Kamala Harris over here. If black people need anything, that's what Kamala Harris is there for. Except she ain't speaking for black folks. You see how sophisticated the game is here? Kamala Harris figures she's going to pay big lip service to black people, but only using the same old non-specific lexicon of code words. She mentions black people once every blue moon, mostly as an afterthought, but only as part of a list. And she makes sure the list is big, by the way, so that black people always get lost in the shuffle. We're talking about transgender and Hispanics and women and disabled people and black folks and environmentalists. And we're talking about people who don't have access to clean water. We're talking about immigrants and all the rest. Yeah, she practically never mentions black people in isolation. That's deliberate. For the politician who's trying to curry white votes, they know that every time they mention black people, their chances of getting white votes go down. White voters are always keeping a mental tally of A, whether or not you mention black people. That's the first thing they're looking for. Make sure our guarantee remains in place. You can't be mentioning those niggers. That's going to threaten the system. Don't be mentioning those black folks. And B, if you mention black folks, white voters' ears perk up. Now they're counting how many times you mention black people and in what context. That's what you should have learned from those clowns over at the Daily Stormer. They were not only listening to see if Donald Trump mentioned them, but they wanted to see in what context he mentioned them. And when Donald Trump danced around them, they got the message loud and clear. They know full well that their position is immoral and wrong and unethical, and they don't give a damn. They understand that the name of this game is to lie and lie big. And the most effective tool that white supremacy has used rhetorically has been lies of omission. It ain't just what you say. What's also equally important is what you don't say, what you leave out. So when you talk about who's going to get what from presidential candidate ABC, just make sure the black folks don't get mentioned. And white racists are looking going, okay, good. They didn't mention the black folks. Good. Okay, that means that there's going to be the same consistency of policy, white first. See, you mention black people too many times, and white society will reject you altogether. Whenever you talk at a political rally, you always make sure to tell white voters what they're going to get. When you mention black people, on the other hand, it should only be in passing, and do not ever say that black people are actually going to get anything. You can talk about stuff for poor folks, you can talk about stuff for the inner city, you can talk about stuff for people of color, but black people? Nah, we don't get specific with black people. There's a racialist pecking order in America, and white society wants anyone who seeks the presidency to assure and reassure them that the free ride that's been going on for 500 years will continue unabated. They've been getting a free lunch for the last half millennium, and they'll be damned if you're going to start charging them for it now. This is the kind of cynical political triangulation that's the trick black people have been falling for decades. And don't expect to see any pushback to Kamala Empty Suit Harris from the congressional black talkers. These guys are all playing the same game. They signed on to white supremacy a long time ago. That was part of their entree. They're part of a private club. You haven't been seeing them giving the old college try to standing up for black folks. They haven't done it, and they're not going to. Face it, the black misleadership class is there because as black people, we have unfortunately, tragically, a critical mass of black folks, starting with black baby boomers, who have just been the most damnable curse to be put upon any generation of people, but the baby boomers who decided a long time ago that they were so eager for attention from white power, they would vote for black politicians not because they wanted black politicians, but because they figured that if they voted for some black politicians, that would make the white politicians pay attention to them. That was their political triangulation. We want some attention from the white politicians, so maybe we'll get it if we vote for some black folks. That'll show them our feelings are hurt. But of course, all it showed the white politicians was that the best way to get black people to fight against their own black interest was to get another dark face to sell them on white supremacy. White supremacy in drag. But there is one thing that Empty Suit Harris and the congressional black talkers and their white paymasters back of them didn't count on. And that's you and me. You see, we were dead serious when we said that we will not vote for any candidate who we did not put out in the field ourselves. We were serious when we said that you're going to have to say black. You're going to have to speak specifically to black people. That's what the 2016 election was about. Whether it was Mark O'Malley getting checked when he tried to pivot to all lives matter. Yeah, we know you're looking for some white votes. You've been getting over on black people in Baltimore, silly as they've been. You've been getting over on them. So you figure you take this show on the road, and if you say Black Lives Matters, I'll say you're right, all lives matter. No, we didn't say all. We said black lives, because black people aren't the ones gunning white people down in the streets. That's why. And black people aren't the ones who get on these juries and act as a rubber stamp committee for the murders of black people. It's white racists who are acting as a racialist cabal, a lynch mob in the jury room. So you have to prove to us that you're going to fight against white privilege, against white power. You have to show you're going to do that. Mark O'Malley thought he would get away with something. He got away with nothing. Hillary Clinton tried the same thing as she found her support dampening, weakening, and eventually collapsing where the black vote is concerned. This taught white power a lesson, and you can tell they were traumatized by it because you would think that they would at least come to the black community and say, hey, we're going to sing a couple of songs. We'll send some of our bootlicks to the black churches here and there. We'll get Pastor Porkchop or Reverend Hog Mog with the chitlin juice running down his jaw. We'll get one of these pulpit pimps to sing our praises. But it ain't working like that. It's because even the old standbys, the old faithfuls, the old clowns, clods, and fools, even they are finding out that, if you step to the black community, they're not listening. They have closed their ears now to all the old rhetoric. You're not going to talk around the issue this time. The Democrats were going, damn, if we can't talk around the issue, well, just don't say anything at all. It would be more dangerous to try to engage with the black community at this point. Let's see if we can scare them. What we'll do is we'll see if we can get some comedians and some black actors, we'll see if we can get them to mislead the black community and say that you got to stand up for DACA, stand up for immigrants, stand up for this, that, and the third, but not for yourselves. At this point, they're throwing everything and the kitchen sink at the wall to see if anything's going to stick. They're panicking right now because they don't know what the hell to do. See, it's not about whether or not the Republicans or Democrats are in power. What matters is, has a sufficiently large enough critical mass of people signed on to the con? That's what this is about. This is about mind share. White supremacy is a lie. White supremacy is a con. And that includes the so-called political systems and the politicians that it's created and promoted and propped up. You see, it doesn't matter if you're talking about any one particular politician or any political party or political parties. It's not about them. They're not the ones who this fraud, this political, social, economic fraud is being put on for the benefit of. This is about you. It has always been about whether or not you are going to go along with the lie, because truth be told, they don't really have any means to force you to do it. Sure, they'll bring out some racist guys with some guns and batons, but the truth of the matter is, as these guys have found out, even a smaller group of black folks, especially black men, if they decide that they're going to go ahead and put something on your head right quick, your military doesn't stand a chance. They would get overrun, because at the end of the day, it comes down to who wants to fight more. And there's a lot of repressed anger and rage among black people, specifically black men, at the way things have been going. The white supremacists always say, we've been waiting 2 or 3 generations for this. Well, guess what, dumbasses? We've been waiting for it a few generations too. And you saw what happened when the deal went down. So that's what they're looking at. They see that there's a highly enthused group of black men who would love the chance to finally not merely rattle their sabers, but to go ahead and confront these white supremacist foot soldiers. They know that. This is what old TJ, Thomas Jefferson, meant when he said, we have a tiger by the ears, and we can neither safely hold him nor let him go. He was talking about the black man is what he was talking about. We got him by the ears right now, but he's about to get away from us, and we can't hold on to him. We can't reassert our grip, and at the same time, we also don't have the ability to let him go because he'll take a huge chunk out of our hairy behinds, so we ain't really sure what the hell to do. Well, the solution to be called on was to try and find one of their own to deceive them and mislead them. And so they have. But it seems like a critical mass of black folks have finally said, we're not going to play the game anymore. And now the good white powers that be don't know what the hell to do about this. This was a contingency that they've been scared of, but they've never been able to actually come up with a solution for it. There are no good options here for them. They need you to continue to go along with it. And yet here you got people like old Professor Truth, B1 Brigade, who keep up the steady drumbeat of this is all a lie, disengage, disconnect, distance yourselves from them. Do not be part of this. Don't vote in their elections. You need to be looking out for your own interest. Don't listen to their rhetoric. They're never going to actually act on any of the things that they say. Even the rhetoric will never actually translate into real policy. And that is a complete threat, because you are the reason that the system exists. A con man who has stolen your money only gets to keep it as long as you let him keep it. At the moment you decide, I'm coming for my money, stick 'em up, sucker, I'm here for what's mine, as soon as that happens, they don't have an answer for that. So yeah, of course they need Kamala Harris and the rest of the congressional black talkers, because the game here is to fool you, to continue to deceive you. Better yet, to get you to continue to deceive yourself. As long as you're sitting on your hands, as long as you're doing nothing about it, the game will continue. The con is on. So here we are to tell you, nope, your game is to upset their little apple cart. And why not? It's your apple cart and your apples they stole. We don't know Kamala Harris any more than we knew Barack Obama. We didn't choose her. White Democrats did. And like Obama, she hasn't done a damn thing for us. She hasn't championed one issue for us, and she's not going to. You've never heard her mention the word reparations or how she intends to get them. She's a lawyer. Shouldn't she at least have brought up the subject, if for no other reason than to dismiss it? But she hasn't. Same way Barack Obama, who's also a lawyer, made sure never to mention the R word. Hell, at least Bernie Sanders mentioned it long enough to say, it's not feasible. For Harris and Obama, that word is so radioactive for them, even a dismissal of it would be too much. Kamala Harris slithered out of California. Now, common sense would dictate that as out of control as California's police departments are, she should be on a nonstop crusade against police brutality and racial profiling. But she's not. She's practically never mentioned it, and she damn sure never talks about it as an issue specifically terrorizing black people. After all, like Obama and Hillary before her, Kamala Harris wants those police union votes. Oh, you saw the Philadelphia Police Union who called Black Lives Matter's animals. And you saw what's going on in Las Vegas, haven't you? You've seen what happened to that brother out there, Michael Bennett, attacked by a Latino police officer. But hey, we ain't worrying about all that. None of the politicians are saying, how dare you attack somebody and then turn around and say that he owes you an apology, and you call yourself smearing them? Nobody's looking at the police and saying we need to suspend their funding, because it ain't about keeping streets safe. Crime is at the lowest it's been in like 2.5 generations. What this is about is the fact that white supremacy looks and says, damn, the wheels could fall off any minute. We're going to need a sufficient number of race soldiers on the streets to make sure that black people don't decide to tear down the social order once and for all. That's the job of the police. It's twofold. One, to make sure that the economic, social, and political guarantees that those classified as white enjoy continue to stay in place, because it's all ill-gotten gain. It's all stolen goods, stolen from you. So you got to make sure they continue to enjoy it so that when they break the law, they can expect a certain amount of social support, that the society has apparatuses in place that are meant to protect them, coddle them, pamper them, and the police are part of that. And just in case anybody, black people think that they're going to overturn that or challenge that or going to demand that there's going to be equal pampering all around, well, the police's job is to make sure black people get locked up, abused, killed, use violent force, and the police are the tip of the spear on that one, to use the power of the state through state-sponsored, state-sanctioned, state-guided, state-promoted violence in order to make sure that you don't get any ideas about changing things. Kamala Harris knows that you're not going to see these politicians, black, white, or otherwise, talking about how these departments need to take the hard line against racial profiling and need to go after bad officers. How the hell can you clean up a pigsty? You can't clean up a pigsty. You just can't do it. The police are not cleaning up police brutality because, as far as they're concerned, why would they want to stop doing their job? They understand what their job is. What happened to Michael Bennett? That was not one policeman who was out of control. That was them doing exactly what the hell it is they've always done. The police and the white politicians and the black ones, they are not confused about what the job of the police is in the United States under white supremacy. They know exactly what the job of the police is. That's why Kamala Harris has not talked about putting any of them in prison. She has not talked about suspending federal funds. She has not talked about going after police chiefs because, after all, if the police are out of control, it means that someone needs to be asking if the police chief needs to be investigated. Let's put some heat on them. She hasn't talked about that, and she's not going to. She is here to support white supremacy. She's here to prop it up. She has not given one speech, major, minor, or otherwise, talking about how it's finally time to deal with racial profiling and to punish people and what the punishment should be. She hasn't talked about any legislation. She hasn't called for any legislation, hasn't signed any legislation, and she's not going to, hasn't even proposed any, and she's not going to. She's been out there in California, ground zero for police brutality for the damn longest time. You would have thought that somebody would have caught her saying, just as a matter of statistical error, talk about, we need to put police chief so-and-so in jail and sheriff so-and-so needs to be prosecuted. I'm going after them. You'd think that just as a fluke, she would have said it. Nope, not even once. She's on the team with them. They're scared of white supremacy being threatened, and the bootlicks for white supremacy are terrified of white supremacy being threatened. White supremacy's looking and saying, well, we've got a fallback position. We can always run to Europe or head for the hills. The bootlicks are like, hell, every crumb of our daily bread comes from these white supremacists. They fall, we got absolutely nothing, not even a fallback position, no anything. Now, let me tell you how this deal is going to go down when Kamala Harris finally decides she's going to stop talking around the issue and stop dancing around the edges and finally come up the middle when she finally says, I am officially running for president. The first thing she's going to do is reach out to black women. She's going to reach out to black women and say, I'm a black woman, that should give me the black female vote. And she's hoping that even though black people say that they won't turn out for a candidate who refuses to represent us strongly, that hopefully some number of black folks will go to the polls anyway, because perhaps hopefully gender will matter more to them than blackness. Let me go on the record with this one. Sadly, that forlorn hope for Kamala Harris ain't too far-fetched. So let's make sure we get this straight from the jump. Black women, Kamala Harris is a stranger to us. You better get your mind straight about this, because the day is coming when there's going to be zero tolerance for anybody in the black community who continues to show this kind of vacillating, mealy-mouth, flip-flopping behavior that we've had too much of. If you want to decide that you're a woman first, then that's your team. But if you're saying you're black first, then damn it, when the black men say this is the enemy over here, we better be hearing your voices too. And all these low-key wannabe feminist elements have been all quiet, and you're kind of like church mice and we barely hear a peep from you because you know if somebody mentions the wrong that some black man has done, they got a lot to say about that. They never miss an opportunity to speak out whenever a black man's to be taken to task. But the second that somebody says, hey, white supremacy has propped up a lot of these black female sock puppets inside and outside the black community, when somebody mentions that, all of a sudden the protest is muted. All of a sudden, well, we ain't going to say that you're wrong, but we ain't going to say that you're right either. We're not lending our voices to that. To hell with that. It's Judgment Day. In fact, in the middle of this war, every day is Judgment Day, and everyone will be required to give a daily accounting of themselves. And the people who think that they're going to hide in the shadows and somehow they will say, well, that gets me a bye, no. First thing we're going to do is look at the ledger. We're going to see how many times you spoke out, and who did you speak out against? And we're going to find out how passionately you spoke out against them. If you only did it once every blue moon, or you kind of hoped that you were going to fly under the radar, then that makes you part of the problem. See, Kamala Harris is hoping that she's going to get tacit support, largely from black women. Let's call it out. Kamala Harris is hoping that her primary support base is going to be comprised of black women. If you look at who it is that she posts on her Twitter page or Facebook group, you see, usually within the photo ops, there's going to be a disproportionate number of black women because she's thinking that these are the ones most likely to support her, and a large part of that comes down to she thinks that she speaks their language. This is war. I am not going to be tiptoeing around the issue. I'm going to call it out so we can start making sure that everybody understands. We see exactly what the potential pitfalls and problems are, and we're calling them out from the jump. So I'm requiring any black woman who considers herself to be a devotee of Professor Truth, if you consider yourself to be a part of the B1 Brigade, it needs to be black women out there who are leading the charge calling Kamala Harris out. You want to kneecap this heifer from the jump, then the way to do that is by making sure that there's a sufficient number of black women saying, nah, Kamala Harris, you ain't standing for us, you don't support us, you're not doing anything. See, that's why Hillary Clinton got cut off at the knees. You had a whole lot of white women out there who were trying to drag out some of the golden oldies that they've been repeating since the 1960s. There's a special place in hell for women who don't support women, women being their own worst enemy, blah, blah, blah. You had a bunch of white women who were looking and going, you know what? We don't like seeing all these black or even brown kids in our schools. And well, we need to have somebody who's going to stand for that. The white women made it clear they were white first. Gender? Well, the white man's going to take care of the gender part because after all, long as he's looking out for his children, he's got to look out for his white woman by default anyway. See, they understood what it was and what it's got to be. They were pragmatic. That's why they're getting what they want. They know that feminism crap was just a cry for attention, and they left it in the trash heap of history where it belonged. When it came time for serious action that was going to determine whether or not white women were going to continue to enjoy the perks, privileges, and lifestyles to which they've become accustomed, they left that feminism crap alone, and Hillary Clinton wound up out there by herself. It was white women who largely helped support Donald Trump because they understood, they correctly interpreted, that he made it clear that he was standing for white children, and white women were looking and going, well, hell, I'm more interested in what happens to my child than I am with what happens to me. See, she put her own personal self to the back seat. That's the reason why she's getting what she wanted. There is an order to things. There is a way that things must be in order for things to progress. So any black women out there who consider themselves to be on Team Black Empowerment, you better stop being a bunch of wilting violets and stop it with all of this, well, how come you're going after the sisters? White supremacy figured out 50 plus years ago that the perfect weapon that they could use to cripple the black community was going to be black women. And in the 1960s, unfortunately, a critical mass of black women went along with it. And I think that Kamala Harris could be far more dangerous than Barack Obama because Barack Obama was largely a do-nothing president. I'm looking at Kamala Harris and saying, wait a minute, the battle is joined at this point. White supremacy has finally taken off any pretense of the race war and on, and they're coming at us. The last thing we need is any black person out there. Now that the doggone bullets are flying and the white supremacists are out there and saying, whose streets are streets, blood and soil. Now that they're reenacting 1930s-style Nazi rallies in the streets and they're murdering people, and you got a president who says, well, I'm blaming everybody. Well, that means he ain't blaming nobody at all. No, we cannot afford to go wobbly on this one. We cannot afford to go soft on this one. We got to figure out exactly who the traitors are and exactly who the turncoats are, exactly who the bootlicks are, exactly who the charlatans, frauds, fakers, and phonies are, and call them out. We need to undermine their support from the jump, from before the jump. We are not going to be having any more problems with black men having to fight vanguard and rearguard actions anymore. No more daggers in the back. You're going to have to show that you too are going to tear down white supremacy with your hands, black woman, and that starts by identifying any of these black females who get out here to be mouthpieces for white supremacy, and you must be the tip of the spear against them. It is not sufficient that Professor Truth merely speaks out. It is not sufficient that Professor Truth throws the light of truth onto Kamala Harris. The sisters have to show that when it comes time, especially for black women who are either off code or on the wrong team, that black women will be the main ones, indeed the first ones, that they will have to contend with. Because you see, it didn't take white men dragging white women kicking and screaming to turn their backs on Hillary Clinton. They didn't have to sit there and put too much effort into that. White women seemed to get the point without having to be led to it, and that's the reason why they were able to achieve disproportionate success in their goals. If you need somebody to point it out to you, if somebody has to repeatedly tell it to you, then what that means is you're resisting it, you're fighting it. Apparently you resent it somehow. If I say that Kamala Harris is a cancer and that she needs to be pointed out and rooted out, and your reaction to that is, how come you ain't talking about David Clark? How come you ain't talking about Herman Cain? How come you ain't talking about Clarence Thomas? If that's your freaking reaction, then that means you're a problem and we don't have the luxury of dragging any more problems. Kamala Harris is not the only issue, but I see her for what she is. She is the Democrats' attempt to try to sweet-talk us off of the righteous position that we have taken in and dug our heels in upon. And that is the black vote ain't voting for Democrats in any capacity until they take the oath. Given time, either if we marshal our own internal resources or if the Democrats become desperate enough to maintain their wing of white supremacy and try to fool enough black people to remaining engaged, even if only rhetorically, to try and make sure enough black folks stay within the plantation of the idea that you really can get this wicked country to treat you fairly, if they can just throw enough bones, Kamala Harris is part of that effort. She's a trial balloon. Kamala Harris's purpose is to test our resolve. That's why she's there. Her job is to test us. Did we really mean what we said? Sure, the black community was angry, but as Dr. Martin Luther King said way back in the 1960s, they were just trying to find out, did the Negro just want to blow off some steam? See, what's happening here, they know that black people are mad as hell. They know that we've been getting targeted. They know we've been getting killed with impunity, and they've been the ones killing us. But what they want to see is, did we mean what we said when we told them, you're not going to get any more black votes? We're disengaging from the system. White supremacy, like all cons, especially sophisticated cons, it is inherently, utterly, crucially dependent upon a precariously dangerous balance. Any little thing could knock it over. It depends upon us remaining where we are to maintain the balance. And when we start saying, nah, we're leaving this con, and the only way that we might even consider, I won't say participating in, but I will say being involved tangentially in the con, is that the con is going to have to attack itself now. We are telling white supremacy to put a blade to their own throats. We are facing them with a catch-22. They can't maintain white supremacy without a critical mass of black people playing along with it. But at the same time, we're demanding that in order to play along with it, you gotta do things detrimental to yourself. That's a catch-22. So they trot out Kamala Harris. The goal here is to see, did we mean what we said when we said no more votes from the black community for Democrats until you start saying black? Did you really mean black? You sure we can't get away with just having a kind of black woman out there who attacks Donald Trump? You sure about that? And don't expect her to go away quickly. One of the things that white supremacy has learned, because we tragically taught this to them, was that the black community may hold for a few minutes, but we have serious problems with persistence. We are consistently inconsistent. That's the lesson that we taught them. So as far as they're concerned, especially with their massive resources, they can afford to let Kamala Harris sit there and say, hey, the 2018 midterms are right around the corner. You don't want Donald Trump to strengthen his hold on the White House. We need to pry his fingers from the levers of power. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Was he a threat to democracy when he was giving all that money to Hillary Clinton? When he was supporting Bill Clinton during the 1990s and calling out Bill Clinton's detractors? Was he a threat to democracy then? Was he a threat to democracy when he was taking out ads in the New York Times assailing 5 innocent black kids who had been railroaded, the Central Park 5? Was Donald Trump a threat to democracy then? Was he a threat to democracy in the 1970s when he was engaging in blatant racist housing discrimination against black people? Was he a threat to democracy then? So, as long as he attacks black people, and as long as he puts money in the pockets of white Democrats, he's not a threat to democracy. But the second that Donald Trump decides he has a little something to say against your would-be future constituency, all of a sudden Donald Trump's a threat, or at least they want him to be perceived as one. As far as I'm concerned, as far as my people with their heads on straight are concerned, when it comes to threats to democracy, that's an oxymoron in the United States. In order for there to be a threat to American democracy, there would have to be American democracy to begin with, and this country is not a democracy. It's a racialist autocracy. It's an ethno-state, and there's no such thing as democracy in an ethno-state. This country has not had democracy for one moment of its entire existence. For 200 years, the United States has supported dictatorships, like when it supported the white ruling class of Haiti. That was a freaking ethno-state dictatorship. The United States is a dictatorship itself. So there is no way in hell that you're going to sit here and tell me that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. The United States is not a democracy, and the people who cherish the United States, these people are not patriots. They are racialist ideologues. So to say that Donald Trump is somehow bad for America, well, America's been bad for the world, so to me, that's a distinction without a difference. No, we are not going back to the plantation. Yes, we are serious. We mean exactly what we say, and it will be the sweetest of delicious irony if you have some Democrats here saying, well, maybe to keep the black people, just to get a few of them to re-engage, maybe we ought to do a little something? See, this is the problem. They learn from history. This is the problem that happened 150 years ago after slavery. That's what Reconstruction was about. There were some people in the U.S. government who were trying to figure out, was there some middle ground that would enable them to avert the threat of these good old boys trying to stage a second insurrection, and at the same time maintain the racialist pecking order, and what they found during Reconstruction was black people starting to rise. And there were Republicans who, in order to secure their position, they made the devil's bargain with the good old boys, that they would end Reconstruction if the white supremacists would support them. See, that's what happened to Reconstruction. The Republicans who put Reconstruction in place also decided to get rid of it because, as Abraham Lincoln, a Republican himself, said, I do not believe in the equality of the races. I believe that the superior position ought to be assigned to the white man. It was not an accident. It was not a coincidence that Abraham Lincoln used the word assigned. He used that word deliberately. And if you want to know what the word assign means, according to Merriam-Webster, what it means is to transfer property to another, especially in trust or for the benefit of creditors. And does that not precisely explain exactly what the racialist pecking order of the United States has done for 500 years? It has taken the wealth, the material resource, the human resource, the intellectual resource of black people and transferred that property to white society. But there's also other definitions for assign. The secondary definition, according to Merriam-Webster, is to appoint to a post or duty. To appoint to a post or duty. I would see the superior position, that is, overseer, assigned to the white man. He would see them appointed to a particular position. Now, of course, another way to look at that term assigned is that something's being given to them. They didn't earn it, it's just being handed over. See, that's what's going on here. The times may change. The white supremacists don't. I want you to understand that the same way you had bootlicks, sellouts, and such on the plantations, you still got them today. Ain't nothing changed. Have you changed? I'm hoping that you've changed. I know that the bad guys aren't going to change. The question is, are you going to change? Because if you do, then that changes everything. You're going to have to dig in your heels. They're going to try to make your position uncomfortable for you because this is war. And one of the first points of warfare is you try to figure out, how do you rattle your opponent? How do you make it where your opponent looks and goes, I can't maintain this position? Can you outlast him? Can you wear down his resolve? Well, can they? See, it's easy to say it now. We're still in early days, early going. But I was the one who told you that Donald Trump was not going to really be able to attack black people too ferociously. How can he? They've been attacking us for 500 years. And a lot of you were scared. Not all, not even most, but enough of you scared. A lot of you don't actually know your history. You say you do, but you don't. You don't really pay attention. So when I told you Trump could actually turn out to be a net benefit for us because he can't really go in on us, they've been coming at us and they've been killing us in the streets. They can't really do anything to us that they haven't been doing up until now. But what would happen is they'd start choosing other targets, because we may be their top target, but we're not the only ones. A lot of you didn't understand when I said that, but now you're starting to realize, not just with DACA, but other things, you're starting to understand where I was coming from. Now you're starting to get it. See, you're never going to be able to survive the race war, much less be able to prevail in it, unless you can look at things from a cold, clinical, precise point of view. And you can't do that if you're scared. Or if you're doing it based on anxiety, or your particular insecurities and hangups and dysfunction. So if you're one of those people who can't overcome your own myopia, your own mental blocks, and truth be told, for many, intellectual laziness, if you can't overcome that and think things through clearly, calmly, clinically, rationally, then perhaps you ought to listen to those of us who can and who always have. Donald Trump is a threat, but no more of a threat than Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Bill Clinton or the Congressional Black Talkers or the Supreme Court or your local mayor who you didn't choose. We are not being presented with new threats. The threat ain't changed. It's been the same thing for 500 years, rinse and repeat. What we are being presented with, though, is an opportunity here. Let the white supremacists get a little rowdy, show themselves for who and what they are, shake things up. We've had 50 years of a quasi-détente. As Dr. King put it, negative peace, where you have to be taught to suffer in silence. What we need is to go ahead and let people see that no, it's not hunky-dory here. All of that colorblind, we shall overcome, all of the faux, fake, phony progress. Nah, let's show everybody that's all been a sham. That's all been a lie. The war has been taking place against black people. We just haven't been making any bones about it. We haven't been speaking out like we should have. Let's call it as it is. And by doing so, we can see the problems as they are, call them as they are, and face them down decisively. That depends on you. That depends on how much resolve you have. And whatever decision you make has to come from you. It can't be a matter of, well, the Democrats did something, so let me react to that. No, we aren't doing that. You know, in his book, The Art of War, Sun Tzu was talking about tactics to use to find out whether your opponent has some sort of overarching game plan. Does he have some sort of overriding strategy that he's following? And one of the things he talked about was how he had two particular armies, two particular groups of armed men from two different nations. And you had one group who was more or less the invader, I suppose. The other army staged a quickie attack, put some men out there. They wanted to see what would happen if they did this. And they did it for a reason. If the opposing armies saw these enemy troops and immediately gave chase and decided to pursue them, What that meant was there was no overarching strategy. These guys were just out here catch as catch can. They were just basically improvising. That meant that there was no big idea, no overarching strategy. On the other hand, if they didn't give pursuit, if they instead just repelled the enemy attack, and then got back in formation and resumed marching in the direction they had before, what that meant was they had a strategy. They were here for a specific purpose, and they were not going to be deterred from it. They were not going to let anyone blow them off course. See, that's what happens when you have an army that actually wants something. Who came up with a game plan before time? Who is disciplined and focused? The question, I suppose, is that our army? When we call ourselves the B-1 Brigade, is that who and what we are? Because Kamala Harris is the first distraction, the first red herring, but you can be damn sure she's not going to be the last. And they're not going to be just throwing people at you. They'll see if they can come up with some fake, phony legislation, quote unquote. And don't expect the legislation to just go one way. They'll either try to come up with something they hope will be some sort of bait to get you to say, I gotta vote for the Democrats so I can get me some goodies. Or if they can come up with something that hopefully you might feel threatened by. Well, truth be told, they've been attacking us 5 ways from Sunday. Unless they actually do decide to come along and draft the official We Hate Niggers amendment to the Constitution, there's really not a whole lot they have in that regard. They don't have a whole lot of new that they can come up with. But that's not to say that the white media won't try to take some otherwise meaningless legislation that doesn't really do anything harmful to us, that doesn't really mean anything because it doesn't really turn up the heat. But Mitt Romney might come out of mothballs and say, we need to put some black people in jail. Yeah, because you haven't been doing that so far. And the white media will say, Donald Trump, he wants to put all the black people in jail. Yeah, because Barack Obama wasn't doing that. W wasn't doing it. Bill Clinton didn't create the modern prison industrial complex. I mean, nobody's actually had this idea before. So we should be scared if the white media tells us that Donald Trump's attacking us. Yeah, because everybody's been treating us so nicely up until now. You better see the con for what it is. Because Kamala Harris, she's going to drag out some of her puppets on her payroll. You've already seen some of them in my Twitter feed. These clowns are people who you don't know. This is who the Kamala Harris support base is. A bunch of fakers, frauds, and phonies whom you never heard of and ain't done a damn thing for you. Oh, but you should totally take their word for it that Kamala Harris is on your side. She's going to be a benefit to you. So some of these paid shills are going to claim that she helped them out of a jam or some other meaningless anecdotal example of how she's in our corner. But you know what? Donald Trump managed to have some pet Negroes vouch for him too, you recall. See, that's the game that's always been played, and both Democrats and Republicans alike have played it, or rather, they've played you. So, is it a brand new day? You say that it is, but that's not a question you can answer with words. It's a question you can only answer with actions. You keep saying it's a brand new day. Well, I'll believe it when you show it to me, and you cannot show it to me today. You cannot show me that this week. I'll be looking at your actions over the course of the next few decades. That will show me whether or not it's a brand new day, because the occasional lip service to the black community won't do, not anymore. We've never had knee-to-knee talks with Kamala Harris, and given the current climate within the black electorate, you better believe Kamala is looking and asking, can I have a nice group of nice black people who won't paint me into a corner and demand that I speak against the interest of the dominant society? Remember that video I put up about Roger Ailes and how back in the 1960s he was helping to stage manage Richard Nixon's so-called town halls? He would fill the studio audiences with a bunch of Republican voters who Roger Ailes already knew were not going to ask any tough questions. They would just give one softball after the next. I told you about that, and guess what? It's the same thing Hillary Clinton did. I told you what a sham it was when you had those alleged Black Lives Matter so-called protesters who came to a Hillary Clinton rally. She never met with anyone who's about black empowerment, but she wanted to meet with these young Black Lives Matters protesters, and here they were. They went from talking about Hillary Clinton, you're ignoring us, and police brutality and all the rest, to, we want you to feel our passion. Whoa, it's all about your feelings? That was all fake. You need to be smart enough to understand when politicians hire people to do some agitprop for them. You need to be able to see through the scam. So politicians, Democrat, Republican, and otherwise, have pulled the old play of having some black front people out there to vouch for them. The question now is, are black people who are able to ignore Hillary Clinton going to be smart enough to ignore Kamala Harris and whoever or whatever comes after her? I want you to understand, this is going to be the new normal. It better be the new normal. If you want to survive, thrive, and prevail over white supremacy, this better be the new normal. We don't give a damn about what you say. Truth be told, we aren't terribly impressed with what you do. It's all about what we're going to get and what we are doing. Kamala Harris came to us completely empty-handed, and that's because she expects for us to hand her the presidency. This isn't about black people. It's all about what Kamala Harris thinks she's going to get for herself. This is not even a con job anymore. It's just a straightforward robbery. Give me the presidency. I think I deserve it. Nah, if it's all about Kamala Harris, then let Kamala Harris get the presidency for herself. Last time I checked, you can only vote for yourself one time. But as for those of us over here in the B1, those of us who are actually directing and guiding the real conversation for black people who actually matter, truth be told, the Pookies and Ray Rays, they're not really the ones who vote. We're the ones who vote. So the black vote is going to go in the direction that we want it to, if we are consistent with the message, if we stay on point and stay on target. And right now, the first person that we're going to make a political example out of, just to let these white supremacist bastards know we mean business, is Kamala Harris. Whenever her name comes up, you heap scorn on her. And black women, that must include you too. You need to be leading the charge. Make it clear you're not fooling us. Make it clear there's rules and regulations to get the black vote. The same way that white voters are constantly paying attention and keeping a mental tally of how many times you mention black people, we're keeping a mental tally too. How many times did you mention us? And when you talk about us, were you specific or were you vague? Because we will only support you to the extent that you support us. And even then, you need to be real about it. Even under the best of circumstances, even if the Democrats suddenly do an about-face, they're only going to get support until we have gained enough power, wealth, and influence for ourselves that we will be able to field our own candidates. So our goal is to put white supremacy not merely on life support by starving it for black votes. The goal is to put white supremacy into its grave, finally. And that's not going to happen as the result of supporting the right Democrat or even the right Democrat policies. It will only come when black people are in the driver's seat. Anything and everything must be a stepping stone to that. We are not here to support the Democratic Party. We are here to support black empowerment.